Hi everyone. This time, let's talk about security life cycle. When people talk about security, usually people talk about a one-time solution. For example, if you are having problem, then you buy antivirus, you buy firewall, you buy intrusion detection system and things like that. But that's not the proper way to handle security. First of all, if you want to protect yourself, you have to know what kind of asset or things that you want to protect. We call the things that we want to protect is asset. Now in the digital world, you have to find out what is the asset that you want to protect. The easiest way, let's start with the hardware. So an IT hardware or an IT asset would be my notebook here. This is an asset. Because there's a cost to it. If somebody steals my notebook, then then I might lose my asset. Another way is server. That's also an asset, hardware. You can also have a firewall. The physical firewall, it's also an asset. But you can imagine, if I have an asset, then there must be a depreciation of this asset. What is the depreciation value of my hardware? Is it 5 years, 2 years? And still have a problem in basically accepting that we have an asset, a hardware asset, and it's depreciating. When we talk to people or to companies and they want to have a security, first we ask them, okay, what kind of hardware asset do you have? And these companies usually they don't have all this of servers, computers, or their assets. So that's one way, hardware. The second way is software. Is software an asset? Now this is a bit tough. People will talk, oh, okay, software is an asset because you have to pay for it. For example, if you buy Microsoft Windows, then it is as an asset because you buy Microsoft Windows. You buy Microsoft Office, it is also an asset. You buy your database, Oracle, for example, an expensive database, it is also an asset. But what if you have a Linux operating system? It's free. Is it an asset or not? To me, it is an asset, but with $0. It's kind of strange, right? You have an asset or things that you want to protect, but it has a zero value. See, the thing is later on when we talk about protection, we have to calculate the amount of protection through these assets. So for example, let's imagine this. You have a bicycle. Your bicycle, you have like a $500 bicycle and you want to protect your bicycle. You buy a chain. So nobody will steal your bike. So you have a $500 bicycle, you buy a chain for $100. Still makes sense. You buy a chain for $50, makes sense. Imagine if you have a bicycle, an old bicycle, and nobody actually wants to touch it because it's very old, very dirty, very probably some of the parts are broken, things like that. If you buy a chain to protect your bicycle, probably the cost of the chain itself is more expensive than the bicycle. It doesn't make sense, right? So you have to calculate the protection against your value. Now let's go back to software. Software, it is an asset, but it is difficult to measure it. Now let's talk about depreciation of the software. Hardware depreciates, but does software depreciate also? I think so, because imagine, do you still want to use Windows 3.1? Nobody's using Windows 3.1 anymore, or Windows Vista, for example. It's already obsolete. So there is some kind of depreciation in terms of software value. But how do we calculate this? Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Now if I have a software and it is built by people in my own company or my own entity, say I have 5 people working on this software and they develop the software for 6 months. How do you value this software? It is tough. So some people will say, oh, okay, so let's just value the salary of these people and then multiply it with the number of months they're working on the software, and that's the value of the software. And again, every year it depreciates. But what if 1 year, we make improvement to the software. The software is getting better. So the value increases. So this is actually a headache. If you have a software, it is a headache. First of all, you have to list the software, and then you have to list the value, and then you have to list the depreciation of this software. So, okay, imagine how difficult it is to actually create a list of your asset. Hardware is difficult, software is difficult. The third one is the most difficult, is the data itself. People said the data is the most valuable of all the things. Imagine you have access to Google, Gmail, Google Mail, Facebook, Instagram, and how do they get so, these companies, how do they get so valuable? Because they have data of all people around the world. So data has values, but it's difficult. For example, if you are a university, for example, you have a data of your students. Oh, how do you value this data? For example, I have data of my students. Would you buy the data of my students for $10,000? Probably not. $1,000? Probably not. $100? Probably not. $1? Probably you'll buy it. Okay, I just $1. So the value of my data is only $1, and I want to protect this data. It is difficult, right? How do you justify protecting your data if you don't know the value of it, or if it doesn't have the value? So imagine if you want to create a list of your digital assets. Hardware, it's very difficult, software is difficult, and data is the most difficult file. Now, once you have all this asset, then you start designing protection. Now, let's go back to getting this asset. Most people in the IT business, we don't know the value of the asset because we are guardians of this asset, but we don't know the values. Really, the values, the one that know the values are actually the owner of the applications of it. So sometimes we go to the application owners and ask them, what is the value of your application? How do you plan to protect your asset, your data, your software, your hardware, and things like that? So by talking to them, we know the assets, and by talking to them, we design the protection. And the design of the protection, it's not, buying a firewall, antivirus, and things like that. First, you design the policy and procedure, because you have to know who are allowed to access this data, who are allowed to access software and hardware. So the first thing is to create policy and procedure. Once you have the policy and procedure, then you can implement it by buying the proper hardware and software to it. So, for example, accessing to the internet, the policy of our university is to monitor the access of students through internet. So that's why we use proxy. We have to use gateway. So we implement it through hardware. This way, we can buy software, hardware through vendors, and sometimes we ask vendors to help us also monitor. We already have assessment, we have design, we have implement, and sometimes things happen, bad things happen. Sometimes incidents happen. Then you have to investigate whether these incidents are real, and then you have to collect data, and sometimes you have to do forensic, and then you go back to square one. You have to understand again what your asset is, and you redesign again. So the security is a cycle. It's not a one-time solution. So you start from assessing, and then you go through that process, and then you go back to assessing, and then you create a cycle. So security is not an end product. It's a process.